Good morning, all. There appears to be at least mild interest in the subject we're addressing this morning, I'm glad to say. I want to welcome all of you here to the Boston Foundation. My name is Paul Grogan. I'm the president of the foundation, and I see many old friends and colleagues throughout the room. But for those of you who may be here for the first time, the Boston Foundation is Greater Boston's community foundation, a nearly 100-year-old charity that in its history has provided about $1.5 billion of grants to nonprofit organizations working in a wide variety of fields in Greater Boston. And $1 billion of that $1.5 billion has come in just the last 10 years. But in addition to being a major grant maker in the region, we do like to play a role in bringing attention and analysis to the challenges and opportunities our community faces through the Understanding Boston forums and the significant amount of research that the foundation commissions. And of course, we're here this morning to discuss a very important new study that has come out. We have a room full of luminaries, and I'm not going to be able to recognize everyone, but I do want to point out that we are joined by some very important public officials, Boston School Committee members Meg Campbell, Hardin Coleman, and the chair, Mike O'Neill. Thank you for being here. I haven't seen her, but I'm told we're also joined by former Representative Marty Walsh, who is a principal author of the 2010 education reform legislation, which figures prominently in today's discussion. Marty, where are you? There she is. And finally, I want to welcome and perhaps introduce to you this morning a very important newcomer to our community, Jim Canales, the new head of the Barr Foundation. Jim, are you here? There he is. Great. Let me say a word about the program that is about to unfold. After my brief remarks, I'm going to introduce the leader of the team that produced this report, Linda Nathan. The report will be presented by David Rosenberg of the Education Resource Strategies firm and Michelle Lapointe, who's a consultant for the Center for Collaborative Education. Then Elizabeth Pauley, our Senior Director for Education here at the Foundation, will convene a panel, and she will introduce the panelists who will explore various aspects of the report and its implications. We hope to have 20 minutes to a half hour at the end for Q&A from you, and then we will, I'll say a closing word, and we'll have you out of here on time at 10:30, as we always do. In terms of my own comments on the report, first I want to make a clarification because the media accounts could cause a little confusion on this in that this has been referred to as a Boston Foundation study. And what it really is a study that the Boston Foundation agreed to fund. But we did not conduct the study. It was conducted, as I mentioned, by Linda Nathan and an extraordinary team of educators. And the mandate for this report came from Interim Superintendent John McDonough, who very much wanted this report to be done and sought funding from us. And given our longtime interest in this subject of structural reform, we were very, very pleased to provide the funding. But the study is independent. And wanted everyone to understand that. You know, one of the things that I think we have to remember is that this community has been conducting a very extensive and substantial experiment with structural reform since 1993, the Ed Reform Bill, which for the first time authorized charter schools and brought forth from the school system a kind of a competitive response in the invention of pilot schools. And for 20 years, you know, this experiment has been proceeding in various ways, intermittent growth of the charter movement, but more recently, the proliferation of different categories of district schools that allow for various aspects of autonomy. So in fact, there is a very rich history and experience that the group that did the study was able to mine and draw the conclusions that they drew. And so I think we are in an enviable position of having had that experience and examining its implications for the future. I think this is a very bold vision that is set forth, and it's squarely in the Boston tradition. We know that this is one of the great unsolved problems of American life, inner-city education. No city whose school district serves primarily a low and moderate income population has succeeded in delivering broad academic gains to that population. I believe that we can. That has to be our objective, and I think we are in as good a position as anyone to deliver on that necessary promise. So this is a very important conversation. We're gratified at the level of interest that you are displaying and many others throughout the community. And now it's time to get going. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Linda Nathan, herself a visionary educator, the founding headmaster of the Boston Arts Academy, a pilot school, and someone who has just made enormous contributions to this community. And we were very, very fortunate that she was willing to take on the leadership of the task force that has done this important study. Linda Nathan.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the Boston Foundation, and thank you to all of you for being here. But most especially, thank you to my superintendent, John McDonough. So the joke between John and me is, oh my God, he asked me to come into the district office. That was, I think, between us, we got over hundreds of emails saying, you know, had something happened wrong to John, had something happened wrong to me, that I would do this. But John gave me an enormous opportunity to lead a team of extraordinary researchers led by Karen Hawley-Miles and Dan French to really think about this question of autonomy. So I'm going to talk just briefly, because you're really here to hear the lead researchers, but this is what our charge today is going to be. We'll go over, I'm going to set the context a little bit of our work. I'm going to show you a movie, which I think is the most exciting part of what we did. We're going to talk from the ERS lead researcher, David Rosenberg, about the themes from Boston. Then Michelle Lapointe will talk about the themes from our peer districts that we studied. And then, as Elizabeth said, we'll have time for, as Paul said, Elizabeth will moderate a fabulous panel. So this is what John asked me to do. He said, let's get some clarity on what autonomy means for our district. And I just want to keep underscoring, this was not a study of autonomous schools, but this was a study of the question of autonomy. And that's really a study that hadn't been done before. And our questions, as you can see, I hope you can see, should all schools in the Boston Public Schools operate with autonomous structures? That was a fabulous question to delve into. Is autonomy a necessary but not sufficient condition for success? How and under what conditions should autonomy be granted? Should autonomy be withdrawn under certain conditions? And in what areas should autonomy be granted? And so this was Superintendent McDonough's charge to me, and then our charge collectively to our amazing team that worked on this. So this is the context. As charters expand, BPS student population growth, you can use the word lags as we have, or it stays the same. But the point here is that the growth potential of students in our city is not currently going to the Boston Public Schools. So that was the context we started with. I just want to give you a minute to take that in. So we said, as a team, and John had said, BPS is at a turning point. Right now, 32% of Boston Public School students will attend an autonomous school next year. There are many types of autonomous schools. We have schools that go into receivership. We have in-district transformation schools, innovation, turnaround, Horace Mann, pilot. But 32% of BPS students will be in such an autonomous school next year. So what was our approach? As has been mentioned, this was a report commissioned by Superintendent McDonough of the Boston Public Schools. And the first thing I did is I went running, as I mentioned, to Karen Hawley-Miles. Karen, would you just wave? Who is one of the most brilliant researchers and the head of Education Resource Strategies. And Dan French, where are you, Dan? From the Center for Collaborative Education. And we divided up the work. And ERS did the local Boston work and facilitated our cross-functional team, and CCE did the national work. We wanted to test the relationship between increased autonomy and higher student achievement. Is there a relationship? We wanted to pursue that question. We wanted, as I've mentioned, to draw on the experience within and beyond Boston. And again, this is a study of autonomy, not autonomous schools. So I'm going to keep stressing that. I'm sorry, I didn't do this quite quickly enough, but there is what I just said. But here's the more interesting part. What was our approach as a research team? First of all, we did 100+ interviews with Boston Public Schools individuals, both district folks and principals and teachers. We did case studies of high-performing Boston Public Schools, both autonomous and traditional, as we called them. We did a lot of documenting of school autonomy. We did, as I mentioned, through CCE's work, our analysis of peer districts. We looked at student, teacher, and budget data analysis. We convened an expert advisory group in about March who really helped us hone our findings. But the most important part, at least from the perspective of someone who's been in the Boston Public Schools for well over 3 decades, was the work that we did with a cross-functional team of district folks and principals. If you were on that cross-functional team, would you please stand up? Any member of the cross-functional team that worked on autonomy. So give these folks a huge hand. Many of them couldn't be here today because today is, of course, MCAS, like almost every day, is testing day in our school systems now. But they're here in spirit. And these folks, and I want to commend particularly the principals who gave their time on a Friday afternoon. And we worked for 2 hours, 3 hours, some of our sessions were even longer, to really think about what this question of autonomy meant for all of us in the district. And when I mentioned that the most exciting part for me was the film, I want to show it to you now. It'll give you a real sense of the flavor of this work this year. So Maestro, movie, please.
When you're talking about 56,000 students, there is no one-size-fits-all in schools. You know, autonomy is essential.
Giving more autonomy to all schools, we're going to see better results for students because all schools are going to have similar resources and all schools will be held to the same high level of accountability.
The autonomy pushes us to think deeper.
I know my students. I'm with them 5 days a week. When you give those teachers that voice, you actually get teachers who go above and beyond even what they're required.
Part of A, explain why.
Autonomy in and of itself isn't the solution. It's a precondition.
The autonomy awards us the freedom to create a different type of curriculum.
One of the ways we use our curriculum autonomy is that we study an ancient civilization every winter. So 3 months, the whole school is studying an ancient civilization. Those civilizations are selected based on the demographics of our school.
Along with autonomy comes accountability. So you have the power to make decisions, but then you're also really accountable. So the results that come from autonomy, good or bad, are your results. You definitely have to own them. You can't blame the district and say, well, if I had a different teacher or if I were allowed to teach a different curriculum.
We're getting a star because we did excellent group work in science.
It's as we do that expansion, how do we in fact give consideration to making sure that we have a structure in place that allows for both the schools to be able to have their autonomies and also for, from a central standpoint, that we are efficient.
You know, right now we're used to the autonomies over staffing and budget, but 5 years from now we may be having very different conversations about what schools need to have for autonomy and flexibility. And I think we need a system of high-performing schools that is willing to evolve and be dynamic in that work.
So it was important that we reach that level of a paradigm shift. in terms of not talking about what the district does, in terms of not talking about what the district is imposing, but in terms of what we do as a system to move ahead.
And we're looking to the future to say, who will the next superintendent be? We want to be able to give that new superintendent a vision that has come from the field. This is something we want for our system. We have the potential to close and eliminate completely the achievement gap and the opportunity gap that we see every day.
We owe it to all of our students, we owe it to all of our teachers, we owe it to all of our parents to create successful school.
We're in this together.
Hi, I'm David Rosenberg with ERS, and as I hope was evident from the film, this was an absolute privilege of a project and a study to be able to be a part of with John's leadership, with Linda's partnership, and with the incredible participation of everybody who worked on it. What I would like to segue off of the film is that the team that came together with a mandate, but also with a set of norms that they defined for themselves, and one of those was to address what the team called the elephants in the room, to be willing to talk about the hard issues together, which, as Linda alluded to, is not necessarily an easy thing to do. And one of those hard issues is one Linda alluded to right off the bat, which is what exactly is the relationship between autonomy and student performance in Boston. And it turns out that the answer is not always clear. Some of the best schools are autonomous schools, and some of the highest performing schools are not. And so we want to use an example just to show you how that comes to life here. And so what we did is we looked at the highest performing schools in the district. We looked at both student achievement and student growth. And we said, well, what are these schools doing with the resources within their school? So I want to show you examples from two schools. The first school is one where staff did something really creative. They organized their own professional development. They created the curriculum, they taught each other, they led that process. The second school is one where the school leader was able to reassign instructional staff to actually change the nature of class size, to lower class size in meaningful ways in early grades where the greatest impact could be felt. Now, looking at the way the district operates and the rules in the district, one might say, well, are these traditional schools or autonomous schools? These are really creative things that, in theory, are the kinds of things autonomous schools get to do. It turns out one of these is autonomous and one is traditional. And that led us to the question, well, why? Like, to play devil's advocate on the initial premise, why is it that some traditional schools who are doing well are able to do some of these things? And the answer is that the rules are there that allow certain traditional schools to go beyond what is typical, but those moments are rare, and they require certain contexts to happen. So what you can see is that at autonomous schools, you have a situation where the district's policies, election to work agreements with teachers, enable the school, almost encourage the school, and empower the school leadership team to take advantage of flexibility in ways that allow them to be strategic with the way they organize resources in the school. In theory, some traditional schools can do that, but what it takes is a very special context. It takes a principal with extraordinary capabilities, with creativity, and a real willingness to challenge the status quo. And sometimes that status quo, which has been built very rationally over years, is constructed in ways that don't encourage some of the strategic behaviors in terms of resource use that we know from research correlate with student achievement. So we actually tried to quantify this, and we use Mary's school as an example. We'll talk more about the Edison Kate in a little bit. What you see here are the dollars per pupil that are spent by Boston Public Schools in Mary's school. And it comes out to about $7,600 per pupil. Of that, about $600 are dollars that Mary, as the school leader, has direct flexibility over. In this particular case, to APs, some sub-dollars, things like that. The question we asked is, well, what would Mary's world look like if she were an autonomous school? In this case, specifically, we applied the rule of pilot schools, which is about half of the autonomous schools in the district. And it turns out that there's another 15% of her budget, or about $1,100 per pupil, over which she would have additional autonomy right off the bat if she were operating a pilot school. That includes ability to trade in different types of teachers, opt out of certain district discretionary services, some accounting methodology that turns out to be quite meaningful for some schools. But on top of that, the rest of her budget, she would also have significant flexibility over, because that encompasses largely core teachers and administrators in the school, over which she would have additional flexibility over how they get assigned, what the nature of the work is, and how those resources get organized. And so you can see pretty clearly, Mary might be the most creative, innovative principal here, who's willing to challenge the status quo, who's willing to even, have creative interpretations of some of the rules potentially, but her world does not look like it would if she were running an autonomous school. The policies are not lined up to support her in that way. So when we look at this, we say, well, how does that actually play out? And we looked at 3 specific ways in which we talk about purchasing power. You can actually quantify the value that schools have in terms of what they have to spend, basically, or what they get to do with resources. And the 3 things are, can they extend time, both for instruction, professional development, and at what cost? Can they get into this accounting methodology of how they budget using teacher salaries being the biggest component of the budget, of course. And can they buy back certain discretionary services and say, you know what, thanks anyway, district, I want to do this myself because I can do it more efficiently or in ways that meet the needs of my students. And when you look at the policies across schools, you can see that most autonomous schools have the rights to do these things in different ways, and traditional schools generally do not. So the policies in place do not necessarily support the ability of traditional schools to do the things that we know from research lead to or correlate with greater student performance in terms of the way resources are organized within the school. Now, in this context, we say, well, why is that? And it turns out it's not about vision for what we want in the district. In fact, the more people we talk to, the more we got this clear sense that we are in this together in Boston Public Schools. We will rise and fall together. We all want the same thing. This was a universally held belief. We talked about the vision for the schools, the vision of a BPS graduate. It's all there. The gap is around how the policies are perceived and organized in the district and what people understand to be true, largely because, as Linda pointed out, there are so many different flavors, and it isn't necessarily clear to each person out there how things should work. So there is this dissonance. There is this desire for clarity, and I think that was one of the impetuses for the study in the first place. But the idea that there is shared vision of what we want for students, just not shared about what the role of autonomy is, was important in this. The last point I want to make here about Boston before we turn to peer districts is one of the critical points that gets made about autonomy is, well, you need certain capacity to do it. Not everybody can run an autonomous school, and that's true. And so we looked in many angles on capacity, both in the schools and in the central office. And we'll look first at schools and then central office. And so at the beginning of this year, there were 111 principals that we could count in the schools. Nearly half of them had less than 3 years of experience at their schools. And just to go one level deeper, about a third of them, nearly a third of them, were in their first year as school leader. Just using experience as a proxy, it is very difficult to imagine how some of these principals just starting out are going to be able to make the strategic, creative decisions that are required when you have flexibility over more resources. So this speaks to the need to really be able to develop principal capacity, invest both in recruitment and also development at levels that the district over the last several years has a little bit stepped away from. We're going to turn to central office now, and we looked at this by looking through the lens of principals, and we asked them about how they would describe the quality of support they receive from the district office. And as you can see, very few principals are giving the central office in general high marks, and a significant portion are feeling some real challenges with this. And I should say, the comments and the input from folks in the district office were actually quite similar, saying we are challenged to figure out how to do all of this effectively and efficiently. I do want to note that the results varied. So there are certain functions, staff evaluation in particular, where principals are saying, okay, we're starting to get this. But there are some pretty critical functions that principals are looking to the district for, where the district is trying to play a strong role, where the feedback from principals is, we're not quite getting what we need. So just to sum up what we're seeing in Boston before we turn to peer districts, again, one, the highest performing schools, regardless of the type of school, autonomous or traditional, they're trying to do the same things, but their ability to do that is significantly affected by the rules and policies surrounding their existence as a traditional or autonomous school. The vision for success in the district is shared. The vision for autonomy in our path to that success is not. It is unclear. And last and crucially, as came up in the film and will come up again and again, autonomy is a condition for success, but it is not a guarantor of success, and the capacity and the investment the district makes in developing capacity both at the school level and the central office is going to be crucial to long-term success. going to pause there and let Michelle come up and talk a little bit about peer districts, and then we'll wrap up our implications.
So here are the districts. Here are the districts that we worked with. They look a little disparate at the beginning, but if you look, they have similar student populations. And all of these districts have been working, they've had autonomy policies for about 10 years, with the exception of Lawrence, which adopted autonomy policies with the state, the Commonwealth takeover of their district. I do want to caution that because we wanted to get to 5 districts, we didn't have the capacity to do a deep dive the way David was able to do, David and his team were able to do in Boston. But we did talk to different district officials, other stakeholders, for example, folks who provide professional development directly in schools, former officials. So we feel like we got a good sense of what the autonomy policies are, reviewed the policy documents, read newspaper articles going back several years about how these were developed. But it's a different cut from what you saw in Boston. Other things I want to note is that all of these districts, except for one, LA, are providing some autonomy to all of their schools. So again, we're not talking about autonomous schools, we're not talking about charter schools, we're talking about providing flexibility and autonomy to all the schools in a district. But districts are doing that in different ways, and that's really shaped here by their state policies. For example, in Colorado and in Maryland, all districts are authorized, the districts authorize their charters. So there's not that separation, that tension between charter schools and other schools that may be getting funding from the state. They're all district schools. We also saw districts that had superintendents came in with their own vision for autonomy in New York, in Baltimore, and they really helped shape, through their own vision and their leadership, shape what autonomy would look like in that context. And finally, what we saw that was very interesting is that within the district, there are a lot of types of schools. So we're talking about schools being given flexibility to meet the needs of their students and their school community. So in Denver, for example, 45% of the schools are autonomous school models. They're in-district charters or they're innovation schools, but all the schools have autonomy over their budget and their hiring decisions. And if they need additional autonomies to implement their education program, that they can petition the district to add those in order to provide the best program for the kids that attend their school. One of the things I did find interesting, David was saying in Boston that here in Boston we have a common vision for success, but we still don't have common clarity about autonomy. And what we found in the other districts is they do have clarity around what autonomy means in their district. And it means different things in each district, but because they have that common language and that common sense, it helps them with their decision-making rules. So whether you're an innovation school or a charter school or a traditional school that has autonomy over many factors, the school has a way, a theory of action of thinking about autonomy that guides that decision-making to make sure that all schools are treated equitably. So for example, in Denver, school choice is a priority. Public school choice is a priority for that community, and the district has tried very hard to provide high-quality schools to parents so that the choices that the parents make wherever they go is going to be a high-quality school. They've also been closing underperforming schools, and Denver's very proud now that they have much higher percent of seats in high-performing schools. So this has been a shift for them over the last 5 or 10 years that they feel, and they're bringing more kids back into the district because they feel that they can provide in a community that where choice is important, they're providing a lot of high-quality choices. In Lawrence, after the Commonwealth took over the district, the idea was to put resources and decisions as close to the students as possible. So they didn't recreate a district. The folks who are employed by the district actually wear several hats that bring them into schools where they're advisors to principals. So they did not recreate the district. They wanted to get as many resources to the classrooms and in schools as possible. So that is their guiding principle in Lawrence. And then In New York in particular, when Michael Bloomberg came in, he really wanted to foster entrepreneurship and innovation. So his autonomy policy started around that, finding principals who are already in the system who are ready to do that, and then providing opportunities to train principals and to attract and retain principals who are ready to run their own operations, to be entrepreneurs, to bring their best professional thinking to how to serve the students in their schools. So the theories are different across the districts, but within the district, people understand, have a common theory of action and common decision-making rules, which provides greater equity to the schools within these districts. And then a few more of the themes that we looked about. The autonomy and accountability go hand in hand. They're coupled in all of these districts. One of the things we find is that the accountability system is actually less about compliance. Now it's become about supporting low-performing schools and helping the students learn. The accountability process is usually a school quality review process. It includes multiple measures, observations, surveys of parents, sometimes the older students, community members, as well as achievement measures, attendance, not just test scores, so you can get a full view of what's happening in the school, and you can identify places where the school may need help. So it's really done in a way to shore up schools to make sure all the kids are getting good opportunities. And along with this, they're looking to find where people are struggling so they can invest in the human capital, so they can help people. They've hired good people. They want to keep their good people. They want to invest in them, both at the school level and at the district level, because this is a whole new way of thinking about what a district does. So there's a focus on helping educators improve their practice. There's also a big focus on collaboration. It's not just within the schools, though. There's a lot of collaboration between schools. Which fits into this school support category here. I feel that these two are intertwined. The school support is about human capital, but you also have to make some investments at the district level in order to make sure across the district there's been a shift in the culture. There have been changes in the structures too to support that shift. So in terms of the culture, we're talking about support and not compliance. Really want to get in the schools and make sure the educators have what they need to support learning. And in many districts, what we've found is in order to tailor that support, they've grouped schools in ways. Sometimes the schools self-select around one of the larger issues the school is grappling with the faculty, whether it's English language learning or if they want to really do more interdepartmental collaborations within their schools. But in order to provide tailored support, a lot of the districts are finding ways to work with smaller groups of schools that may have similar needs so they can target that. Some places do have the geographic, some places have grade levels because there are so many common issues around a grade level. There are all different ways of doing this, but in order to provide cross-functional support to schools, the support goes out to the schools themselves. Many of these districts are finding a way to organize the schools to help provide that tailored support. So again, these are the themes we found across the peer districts. Within the district, officials can articulate a common theory of action, which helps them as they implement their policy. They've created a new role and a new structure for districts. They've really turned the district around to support the schools and the educators, putting the students first, and the people who work with the students get the support that they need to do that important work. And that has led to structural changes within districts to support that work. So a principal doesn't have to go to several departments. They have a cross-functional team that they can call, and the team will often come to them at their school. The focus on human capital development, as we said, you have new principals, it's hard for them to have the experience, and they may not have the networks within their district to be able to do some of this work, to think creatively within the structures that they have. So there's been a focus on human capital development to ensure that the educators at the school level are able to do that work. And then finally, the autonomy and accountability is very important. And in fact, in most of these districts, we're starting to see some good traction. It takes a while, but we're seeing last 5 years double-digit increases in high school graduation rates in New York, in Baltimore. With the school review process, they're really focusing on how to help schools improve rather than holding them, rather than punishing them when they don't. So it takes a while, but there's traction out there. The accountability process, the multiple measures, seems to really be supporting schools as they give them flexibility.
So I am conscious of wanting to get to our panel discussion and the questions. So just to try to take a moment to briefly tie this together and some of the implications we saw. You all have on your chairs, you received a list of these recommendations, and certainly there's more in the report on these that you can look at. But when we look, I wanted to spend a moment on just a couple of these before we go to the panel. The first is this idea of extending maximum flexibility to schools and where that comes from, and also the idea around support and accountability, consistent with the theme that autonomy is a condition but not a guarantor of success. So one of the things that we did is we surveyed principals in Boston. We asked them about 40 distinct types of flexibilities. And we said, do you have this and do you want it? And so all the numbers you see here will be of 40 flexibilities rather than percentages of respondents. Of the 40 we asked about, there were a quarter that most principals said they had and most principals said they want to keep. Right? I still want to be able to assign teachers to leadership positions in my school. Like, good, we're all down with that. There were a few, the principals mostly, and there's exceptions to this rule, most principals said, I don't have this and I don't want it, right? District, you want to organize transportation, food service, please, by all means. There are absolutely exceptions to that, by the way. But generally speaking, this was the theme. Interestingly, there wasn't a single one we asked about. The principal said, I have this and I really wish you'd take it away from me. So take that for what it is, but for the majority of the autonomies we asked about, most principals said they don't have it, and most principals said they would like it. That includes things like, can I define my own staff job descriptions? Can I determine how many counselors I need and how many school psychologists and social workers I need given the needs of my students? Can I allocate non-instructional positions or organize non-instructional or instructional support staff in ways that are most conducive to the instructional model and the vision I've created for my school? And in a district where we do value the diversity of programs across our schools, these are things that principals are saying, this would really help us to actually realize the vision I've established for our school. So this is part of the foundation for the flexibility piece. The other piece I wanted to talk about was this idea that autonomy doesn't equate to success, and I hope that's clear at this point, but it does create conditions for success. And when we step back and look at, well, what else do you need? And this is linking the peer district research from what we found here in Boston. We decided we acknowledge there are 3 factors. So the first one we talked about is flexibility, but you also need accountability, and then you also need capacity. And hopefully these themes have come clear in this conversation. And just to spend a brief minute on this. So if you look at this from the lens of a district office and say, what will it take for a district office to create a context where principals can be successful with flexibility, accountability, and capacity? Because these things don't happen by themselves. Flexibility we've talked about. We do think that a measure of equity and flexibility across schools is important. You saw what happens at Mary's school where there isn't that equity and the challenges that creates. Accountability is crucial. The expectations we see in other districts and that we'd like to see here need to be clear and consistent, and the types of interventions and the conditions in which interventions and supports happen should also be clear and, again, provided equitably. There shouldn't be exceptions to these. And then, again, capacity. The district in the last several years has really reduced investment in recruitment and development of leadership. That's starting to change in some of the programming that we're seeing. But it also means asking this question of what is the role of the central office vis-a-vis schools? Are we providing direction, or are we providing support, and what does that start to look like? And so just by way of closing up the conversation here and moving to the panel, these are some of the questions, again, on your chair that we are left thinking about. Right? How can traditional schools be more successful? What would it take to extend more autonomies to more schools? Which ones would those be, and what would that look like? This question of the district's posture vis-a-vis schools is huge. Are we support? Are we service? Are we direction? Are we guidance? What does that mean? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? How do we create innovation and incubate new school designs? And then this point about identifying and developing and retaining top school leaders and leaders at all levels becomes crucial. So with that, again, thank you for the opportunity to do the work, to the Boston Foundation, to BPS, and to Linda and John, and we're excited for the discussion.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Pauley. I'm a program director here at the Boston Foundation, and I am delighted to be here with you this morning. I'd like to add my welcome and greetings to Paul's, and also note that we've been joined by City Councilor Tito Jackson, who I think is here. He's in the room next door, so hello, Councilor Jackson. And we've also been joined by school committee member Michael Lecanto, who is here in the back, so welcome. I'm going to invite up the panel in a moment, but I wanted to first thank Interim Superintendent John McDonough for calling for this report. We'll ask him why he did so in a minute, but also thrilled to be working with the BPS team, ERS, and CCE. We're delighted to be collaborating as part of a conversation about quality and how do we expand quality seats for all kids and families in Boston. We're interested in how best to create the conditions for every school to succeed with each child that they enroll. And we're thrilled to be having this conversation about what role autonomy can play in that. So I look forward to the next part of the conversation where we'll be talking with these panelists who view autonomy from their different roles as district leader, school leader, parent, and professor. So with that, I'd like to invite you to join me on stage, if the panelists would join me. I'm going to briefly introduce them. Their full bios are on your chair. It's a very distinguished group. But starting all the way at the end, we have Beatrice Sabater, who is the head of school at Boston Day and Evening Academy, a Horace Mann or in-district charter school that also bears a pilot school designation. She has long been a leader in the pilot schools network and in partnership with the Center for Collaborative Education has worked to share best practices in pilot schools. So welcome, Beatrice. Next to her, we have Interim Superintendent John McDonough. Prior to assuming this role, he was the Chief Financial Officer in the BPS, and in that role, he led the development and implementation of a new funding system that was designed to more equitably allocate funds across the 127 schools inside the BPS. Next to John, we have Ann Walsh. She is the chair of the governing board of the Lee Academy Pilot School in Dorchester, an early childhood school that her children attended for 4 years. She is currently a partner at 1647, an education consulting firm, and previously worked for City Councilor John Conley. Next to Anne, we have Andres Alonso, a professor of practice at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He not only teaches at the Ed School, but he also received his doctorate there as part of the Urban Superintendent's program. He is the former CEO of the Baltimore City Schools, where he led reform efforts that resulted in greater autonomies for all of those schools. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. And finally, next to Andres is Mary Driscoll. You might recognize both Beatrice and Mary from the video we just saw. Mary is the principal of the Thomas Edison K-8 school in Brighton. As principal, she actually led a merger of an elementary school and a middle school to become two elementary schools to become the K-8 that it is today. She is a former math teacher, taught in New York City and Chelsea and Boston, and is the mother of 2 BPS graduates. So please join me in welcoming the panel. So we'll open with general reactions, and we'll just go actually right down the line. I'm going to come first, actually, we'll start with you, Beatrice, just general reactions to the report. What surprised you? What struck you? What have you learned?
Well, I think more than learning, it really confirmed the work that Boston has embarked in for the last 20 years. So we're almost 21. We can make some strategic decisions. I think that what was really fascinating was the process of the cross-functional team. It was really, for me, it was unprecedented work that Boston took on. So I want to thank John and Linda, ERS, and CCE, because this was, it was really kind of practicing for what the district could be if autonomies were granted to schools. How we have respectful, collegial discussions of naming the elephant in the room, as David said, and moving forward to through that, with always keeping the equity and excellence of and success of students at the center of all the discussions. So that was just really an amazing learning for me.
John, general reactions?
So first of all, I'm incredibly grateful that we had the opportunity to do this. And I'm particularly grateful to those school leaders, some of whom are in the room with us today. Mairead, Corbett, Hervé, those up here. You know, we've been on a pathway that has sought different ways to get to flexibility for school leaders for an awful long time. This was really an opportunity for me and Linda to put a stake in the ground and figure out, what does it really mean? What are both the intended and unintended consequences for our now broad portfolio of autonomous schools as well as our traditional schools? And how do we look at those elements that represent conditions for success for all students? At the end of the day, our obligation is to 57,000 students that we serve. Thank you, Councilor Jackson.
Yeah.
This work has enabled us to take on those tough questions, to determine under what conditions are we able to introduce and make available to all school leaders those practices that do correlate to success in schools. It shouldn't be about structure. It shouldn't be about differences. It should be about those things that bring us together in a way that we intentionally move forward our ability to ensure access to quality success for all students, regardless of what type of governance structure.
Thank you. Anne?
So my initial reaction is, this could be so big. Like, this could be the game changer. As a parent, as someone who spends a lot of time with families who are trying to make really difficult decisions. And the process, as Beatrice said, was unlike any process I've been through before in a BPS environment, and that is to say it was exceptionally well done with a lot of care and attention to the things we need to pay attention to, and candor, which was really powerful. But the thing that, so I would love to sit here and say, like, positive and optimism and everything's going to be super, except for the trust, right? Like, let's live in the real city we live in, and that we have a significant trust gap between all the stakeholders that need to actually get on board. So what I'm hopeful for is that there's enough weight to this. There's enough data that says, this is how we can do this, really, and this is why it's good for kids, and this is why it's good for teachers, and this is why it's good for families and businesses and neighborhoods, so that we can all say, okay, we're going. And so then we spend our energy figuring out the how, and not having the arguments about no, and too fast, and too slow, and this doesn't take care of me, and what about that? We all have to just go. And if we don't all, this is the culture of we that was so incredible in that room, when people started to, instead of saying, but the district has to do that, and the teachers will not, that, people all said, well, we have to figure out how to do this so that we can go. And so there's great potential, and I'm just hoping that we're all ready to just go.
Thank you. Andres?
So I'm the out-of-town guy in the panel, so I need to be modest and careful in what I say. Obviously, in my past leadership, I push for this kind of conversation, and as I was reading the report and thinking about the work that you're doing, I kept thinking that it was in a way simpler for us in Baltimore. It was complex in New York. It was simpler in Baltimore because we thought of ourselves as a district in crisis. So we were willing to take huge leaps, and we were consumed with the question of what did we want our schools to be, and what did it take for all stakeholders to get them there. This question of what matters most and what is this for, I think matters tremendously. And in the context of something that has so many dimensions as autonomy does, and you see it in all the domains that were touched in the beautiful presentation. This notion of how did we communicate and clarify and bring everybody to the table around a set of central questions about how we were going to behave moving forward was really the key. So I almost laughed when I saw the survey of the 40 autonomies, because we went through a very similar process, and the results were exactly the same, including how principals didn't want to own food services, which drove me to distraction, because I think that what matters in the lunchroom is so important for the culture of our school. So I kept saying, how do you not own something that shapes the afternoon for you? But once you give people autonomy, you need to let them make certain mistakes, which is going to be my closing comment, which is that there has to be a margin of error in order to allow for learning and growth. And this is going to, if it's done well, it's going to mean that everyone in the organization is going to need to act differently, which means that people need to be a little bit more comfortable with ambiguity and with the potential for error than is usually the case in school systems. And of course, the reward is that there is enormous potential in changing mindsets and behaviors in the conversation.
Thank you. Mary.
I want to echo a lot of what my colleagues have said about this feeling like, potentially a really historic moment in Boston Public Schools. And what is required for us to take advantage of that opportunity is really a mindset shift. The report does a great job of capturing the conversations we had about the need for a system of schools, that it can't be about me as the school leader of the Edison only looking out for the Edison and sort of trying to muster all the resources I can to be sure that everything is fine at the Edison. Because in doing that, potentially, I could have a negative impact on the Jackson Man or on the Gardner or another school close by. And part of the conversation that took place over the year that we were meeting as a working group was really this shift that, the beginning, the elephant was in the room. And I think it was the first time that pilot schools, charter or innovation schools, and non-autonomous schools were sort of called to the table to have this conversation. And there was a little bit of awkwardness at first. And I think it was really important to acknowledge that and get past it. And then to, as soon as you put the 57,000 students in the middle of the table and say this conversation is about them, then, very quickly things shifted and we all found ourselves on the same page. I think the other thing that this report does is it captures the complexity of it. Yep. This is not just a simple, let's flip a switch and everything is going to be all right. It's very, very complicated. There are unintended consequences at every step we're going to take. And so the report is a great beginning of work that we will need to do if we travel down this path to be sure that we're never going to avoid all the unintended consequences, but at least it gives us the beginning of a plan to mitigate the consequences we might generate and to avoid, hopefully, some of the pitfalls.
Thank you. And I'd like to dive into, what this will mean for school leaders, what it will mean for central office. But before we go there, I'd like to pick up, Andres, on something you said and ask John. Other districts tend to ask these hard questions at times of crisis. Baltimore City Schools view themselves as being in a crisis. New Orleans took radical action when they had a natural disaster. What made you ask for this report?
Great question. Thank you. Just coming off the release of several reports recently. Here's what I shared with our school committee about reports. BPS puts itself in a very vulnerable position if we welcome in critical thinking about our practice and actually demand of those we welcome in to be very clear about what works, what doesn't work. So I do think that as an organization, when we create that space of vulnerability, it actually is an indication of our strength and not our weakness. And to the extent that we commit ourselves to continuous improvement, it is a characteristic of a district being strong rather than being weak. And so it's not about what is the banner that captures the headlines in the press. It is about the intentional, thoughtful dialogue that it creates within the district that ultimately moves us to a significantly stronger place from where we start. I actually saw this report as the opportunity. We've had this tension exist in our district for a long time, and our leaders have fought for additional flexibilities for schools for a long time. Take on the tension. Figure out what it means. Make sure that we understand it. Revisit the unintended consequences of building a growing portfolio of autonomous schools and shrinking the number of traditional schools. Figure out what that means for us and make sure that we are growing conditions for success for all schools and decreasing probability for failure for those that at times felt left behind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like both Mary and Beatrice, I'd like to get the school level perspective. And Mary, maybe we'll start with you. Your school was featured in David's slides, and it is featured in the report. It is not a school that operates with official autonomies. Can you talk a little bit about what your experience is as a school leader leading a school in a hybridized district with some autonomies and not having those? What that looks like in terms of, you talked about a level playing field.
Well, I have to say, when I first saw that slide that David presented, I said to Helen, I was like, oh my gosh, that's haunting me. Like, just to sort of have it there so clearly in black and white, the difference in resources that were available to my school by virtue of being a traditional school versus an autonomous school. And in the initial version of the slide, it actually took the Edison K-8 budget and the Young Achievers K-8 budget and sort of compared them. Young Achievers being a pilot school that's very similar in terms of the size of school and the population we serve. And the leader of that school, Ginny Chalmers, and myself, we're colleagues. We went through the Pathways expansion where our school did this 3-school merger and her school did a 2-school merger. So, we talk a lot about school design and what we're trying to accomplish. And there were times when she would talk about, ways she was thinking about staffing her school or programs she was putting into her school. And I would just think to myself, like, she must be so much smarter than I am, because, like, how can she figure out how to do that? And so when I saw the slide, it made me feel like, okay, so there's a whole piece of this that I just, at this point, don't have access to. That said, it's not, so then I don't just throw up my hands and say, oh, well, I'm not autonomous, so there's nothing I can do. There's a lot you can do. And I think the key to doing anything is leveraging the power of teachers in the school and really looking for the leadership capacity that exists in every single one of our schools. And as principal, I really see my job as creating the conditions for the teachers to do their best work. So I'm only doing my best work when teachers are doing their best work. And so, through that, I have, I think, seized some autonomies that are not officially offered to a traditional school. But what I don't have is anything that protects that. So, given a change in leadership at the top, or a car like knocking me off tomorrow, and someone else having to be the leader of the Edison, there's no protection for the really extraordinary work that teachers have done there over the last 6 years. And so that, I really see that's something that kind of keeps me up at night, is how can, what's the next work that we need to do, but also how do I protect the really great work that we've done so far?
Thank you. Beatrice, can you talk a little bit about leading an autonomous school and maybe how the role of headmaster is different or the same?
I think I've had limited experience because I have always led autonomous schools. And I think that I really take to heart the spirit of freedom to create really what is necessary for students to be successful. And I think, like my colleague Mary, if I had not been formally granted autonomies, I would have taken them. Because, not because I'm a rebel, I am, but John knows me. But I think it's what's your vision, for education, for equitable education, for all kids, for all 57,000 kids, and you have to do what is necessary in order for students to create the types of conditions and opportunities so that students can access their full potential. So I had the experience of starting what was a national demonstration program, which allowed me to create an alternative high school in Eggleston Square. So it was a convergence of many community organizations that really put our heads together. How are we going to turn around this horrible demographics that got us the grant, but that's how it happens. And what do we need to create as an alternative for students who were not making it in more traditional settings? So that was sort of like the impetus for autonomy. Then we became a pilot school when the demonstration ended. The demonstration actually proved that the conditions we had created in the school were what was successful, and there was no other alternative within Boston public schools that was doing that. So pilots, we were granted a charter. It was not a real charter because Boston had met its cap. And so Paysan came in and said, what about if you go through the pilot school route? We became a pilot school. So I've always been in autonomous schools. Some of my colleagues in the school system say, isn't that a lot more work to be a leader of an autonomous school? And I said, well, I think it would be a lot more work if you always have to be defying and figuring out how do you get the supports to build the capacity of everyone at the school. So it is a lot of work. As a Horace Mann charter school, we're an in-district charter, so we're hyper accountable. So it's a lot of work because you're accountable to the state, to the district, and ultimately to the students and the families. That's really the bottom line accountability. So it is a lot of work, and really the goal is to empower everyone in the school, because I'm not the only leader in the school. It's like, how do you develop leadership capacity of everyone who works in the school, and ultimately the leadership capacity of students, so they have a voice and also can begin to practice, what the future will be for them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And I'd like to come back to this theme of how the district is thinking about autonomy and accountability together. But first, Anne, maybe you can talk a little bit about what appeals to parents about these autonomies and autonomous school settings.
So the data in the report tells us that something does, that they choose autonomous schools at really considerably higher rates than traditional schools. So we know that they do, but actually that data doesn't tell us why. So one thing I would like to see, I think that this is a great project and they've done amazing things, but family voices really were not part of this process, and family voices are the step that needs to happen next. That parents need to tell us why they choose the school, because maybe it's because it's autonomous and they know that because of the tour they took, it was explained to them, or maybe they just like it. It feels right to them, or maybe it's in the neighborhood that they want their kid to be in school in. We don't have the information to discern. And it would be a real shame if we went and made all our schools autonomous and we thought we knew why parents wanted them, and then we chose the wrong things and families were like, well, that isn't what mattered to me. So it would be great for us to get that data for our family and families that I feel like I know well enough to be able to understand why they made the decisions they did. It was important. I mean, I come from a place of having worked in schools, so you know, my deck is stacked a little in being able to make that decision. But knowing that the curriculum in my kid's school is going to be decided by the teachers in my kid's school is an incredibly important thing. And I love and trust those teachers, and I think they're going to do what's best for my kids, and I want them to be able to be creative and love their work. So the curriculum autonomy was very important, and also the governance. Governance structure was really important to us. I was not on the board when I was a parent at the school, but families were, and I knew who they were, and I knew if I had a question who I would go to in the school community who would you know, be able to answer it from a board perspective. And we had family board members who were part of deciding who our next principal was, who sat in on teacher interviews, who reviewed the budget, who made decisions. So having that family voice is important. Sort of a testament to that is that right now on the Lee Academy board, 3 of our community members are former parents. Our kids have aged out and we're in different schools, but we have stayed because we know the value of family voice, and we want to sort of train up that next set of families who are our family members. So we have former families are most of our community members, and then families who are currently in the school are our family members, and then we also sit with teachers. So there's a really collaborative environment as a result. And when this came into really stark relief for me was when my kids had finished at Lee Academy, I was working in City Hall, and families would come to our office with concerns about, say, budget. And they'd say, our principal is coming to us and saying that we're having cuts and we don't know what we're going to do. And I would say with them, oh, okay, I've done this. Like, I've looked at budgets and I've sat in on governing boards and I know how this works. And we would look and I'd say, well, can't your principal do this and that? And they'd say, no, like, we're a traditional school. Our principal can't do that. She was told she has to do these things. And I would be like, wow, like when you're a parent in an autonomous school, you almost don't know how good you've got it until you talk to a parent in a traditional school and realize they are trying so hard to support their school, and their school leaders and the families are really hamstrung by not having the autonomies that they want. So I'm not sure parents choose the school because it's autonomous, but I think once a parent has been in an autonomous school, it is a very difficult sell to ask them to go to a traditional school.
So Andres, you said that some of this sounded familiar to the work you did in Baltimore. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about what the bounded autonomies looked like, what the process looked like, and what we should be looking out for as we think about autonomies.
So the first thing that I wanted to say in response is that we never talked about autonomies without in some way trying to flesh out the idea that there's no such thing as complete autonomy. Schools were part of a system. They had to be, we were responding to a set of principles about how our schools should be functioning. We were in a context, you know, we had a board, we had policies and regulations. So we also felt very strongly that every school has autonomy. That there are constraints that interfere with the exercise of flexibility, but especially the more capacity you have as a leader, the more you see possibilities for action. So we didn't want to have a autonomy, not autonomous discussion. We wanted to have serious conversations about possibilities, what they meant in practice, and also what was central. And I don't mean central as in the central office. I mean central as in core. What did we want to see across all schools? Because we didn't want to have a conversation where we said to schools, you have flexibilities, and then we would come around 6 months later and said, but you didn't get this right. So we spent an enormous amount of time with many stakeholders engaged in the conversation and many public conversations. On this question of what did we want to see across every single school. We wanted a vision of what schools should be. And then in a context of implementation, what did we want to see as degrees of freedom in different areas? And it seems to me that you're already doing that if you're thinking of autonomies as engaging 40 different dimensions. So that was very important. The second piece is that we didn't want to make it about schools and the capacity of schools to implement. We felt that because we felt that all schools exercise autonomy, and we give them enormous responsibility to begin with, we didn't want to minimize the kind of leadership that it takes to run a traditional school by then saying principals might not have the capacity to. We were entrusting them with the life of kids after all. So we felt very strongly that it was our responsibility to create the conditions for principals and schools to succeed, but that autonomy was a given, and it wasn't even a given, it was also a condition that would allow for the exercise of a more localized type of decision making within a set of boundaries that were clear, that were going to allow the potential in schools. And I love what you said earlier about every school has great leaders. You know, it's not just the principal, it's teachers, it's parents, to somehow infuse what was happening in schools with enormous amount of energy and thought. I mean, what I hated was the idea, and I heard it in almost every school that I visited when I first got to the district, that we couldn't. The efficacy conversation was important to me. If part of what I was hearing from people is we do not have the resources, or we do not have the authority, or we do not have the flexibility, it meant that nobody felt responsible for the outcomes. And we wanted a frame where the accountability was clear and complex and thoughtful, but the guidance and the support was so intertwined. We wanted that frame, and we used that first year to drive that conversation towards what has to happen operationally for that guidance, those elements of support, and that responsibility to be highly coherent, even though we were very forcefully going towards a district where we wanted to see standards across in terms of performance, but we were very, very comfortable with the fact that people were going to do things differently, since the schools were very different. They were responding to different populations. So that tension between what did we mean by standards and what did we envision as excellence and what did we want to see as supports in every school drove a lot of the conversation. And then the other conversation is what had to happen centrally, what had to happen in terms of people, in terms of processes, in terms of systems, to make sure that we understood that. The other thing, and I'll shut up in a second, is that we also understood that the more flexibility we were giving schools, the better our systems had to be in order to understand how that flexibility was being used. So an interesting sort of development of what happened in Baltimore over time is that the more flexibility we were giving people, the more people felt that they had to account for their use, which didn't feel right in terms of the balance of how people tend to think of flexibility. But we felt that it was important for the community to understand what was happening with the dollars and what did it mean in terms of programs for kids, and who was benefiting and not benefiting from this use of greater degrees of freedom. So how you start thinking of what that demands around the organizations of your processes and systems and the roles, I think are at the heart of how 3 years from now, 4 years from now, when you talk to principals and parents about implementation, about how they respond. And for, I'm going to quote Richard Elmore for a second, and maybe because I'm an academic now, which is that, for every unit of accountability, you need to provide a unit of support. Yeah. Otherwise, what schools are going to do the schools are going to push that notion of responsibility, which to me was at the heart of this work. I wanted schools to feel that they were responsible, because without that sense of efficacy in the work, you know, you're going to have externalities that you don't want to have.
So I actually have a follow-up question for you.
Not to me, hopefully.
Yeah, well, it's going to lead to the others. But I'm wondering specifically how central office, I mean, Mary talked about a mind shift in the relationship between central office and schools. What did that look like? And also, how long did it take?
Well, it's still going on after 6 years. I mean, Karen helped me with this process, so she's laughing and nodding right now. First of all, the working groups were always cross-functional with central teachers, principals, and people from community. We wanted this to be about the entire school community, not about principals. I mean, the more that I think about this work, the more that I think about leadership teams rather than individual principals. So how you engage this conversation, I think, is very important. The second thing is that the central office understood from the beginning, and it was a tension at the start, that this was not about schools not doing their job, therefore we needed to do things differently. This was about the entire system needing to improve the way it was doing its work. So in every conversation, for every articulation of what we wanted to see in schools, there was a conversation about what did it mean around control of resources, what did it mean around guidance, what did it mean about support, what did it mean about accountability, and what did it mean about a process of learning in order to make it happen, which by necessity meant that we were, this was as much about the central office as it was about the schools. You know, especially in a context of limited resources where we were trying to push as much in resources to the schools as we could. So, and one of the things that I think happened over time is that we got better in terms of systems of central support, while at the same time always struggling with the reduction of that margin of error that I think is a function of systems that have thousands of employees and have so many units of the work.
Thank you. And Mary and Beatrice, I'm going to come to you in a minute and ask you what you would like to see from the central office as school-based leaders. But first, John, how should we be thinking about this balance of accountability and support in a district that is extending autonomies to all schools?
It is a significant culture shift for central office. And I think the expectations that we now have set is for any major recommendation that we move forward to the school committee, make sure that principal voice is present, make sure that parent voice is present, make sure, particularly at high schools, that student voice is present. And it's also to recognize that none of us operate on major pieces of our work that doesn't have an impact on virtually everybody else in the organization. Identify who those people are centrally and build those teams to inform your work. I think in terms of the larger accountability structure, and how does that play out? Eileen de los Reyes, our Deputy for Academics, has spent almost a year now in working with our new network structure that allows for a very different conversation about both support and accountability. And in terms of bounding autonomy, one of the questions here was, under what circumstances do you withdraw it? So we now have classified our schools into transforming schools, improving schools, and sustaining schools. There are different levels of autonomy that may be appropriate to each one of those. But ultimately, it's about results and impact on kids. So if we allow for schools to have access to to those tools and to those opportunities that provide a foundation that allows them to succeed, and you don't see the results that are expected, then you need to have a serious conversation about how do you pull back, and under what conditions does the district then become more prescriptive. That's a conversation that is not yet done. That's a conversation that still needs to be had. But I think the two major variables here are how do we shift the mindset of central support so that we see ourselves as problem solvers with schools and not as directors or prescriptors of school behavior. And secondly, how do we have a very clear and intentional system of accountability where there is very, very real clarity about consequences as well as rewards? How do you build the incentive structure that you need within that context in order to succeed?
Thank you. Just Mary, Beatrice, anything you would add about what you as folks leading schools would like to see or what that might look like to you?
Well, I think before I talk about what I want to see next, it's really important to acknowledge the things that we've already seen that have kind of brought us to this point. And you know, before John was interim superintendent, when he was CFO, the work that he did along with Dr. Johnson around shifting us to weighted student funding, I think if that had not happened, we would not be having this conversation today. I mean, that was sort of set a baseline. It was like the reset so that every school now knew that you were starting on an equal footing. And going back again to that slide, it's like it's very clear because of weighted student funding that it's not that the Young Achievers was getting more money than I was. It's very equal. I know that every school starts with the same pile of dollars to fund the school. It's the difference is what you're able to do because of how much autonomy you have. And then the second piece of work that's already happened is around allowing all schools to open post positions. And again, that is just a game changer, particularly for a school that in the past has not had that opportunity. And you know, just to illustrate how crucial that is, our school is one of the schools that serves a population of students with emotional and behavioral disabilities. And that group of students is one of the most rewarding, but also the most challenging group of students to work with. And there is nobody who should work with those students who does not feel called to work with them. But under the previous system, every year I would have people placed into positions in my school where that was the population they were supposed to serve. So, you know, before we even talk about what to happen next, a lot has already happened, and that's really thanks to John. So.
Just before I turn it open to the floor, I'm going to ask them all what they think is coming next, but I did want to ask one more question, and anyone who is part of the cross-functional team is welcome to take a run at it. The report calls for the system to collaborate with the teachers union, and in fact, we've talked a lot about teachers and teacher leaders today. We do not have a teacher on the panel, although we have lots of people who have been teachers. How was the union engaged in this process? Have they given any indication of their support for the general direction? Anyone?
I'll take a cut at it. So first of all, the union wasn't specifically engaged as part of this cross-functional team, even though we did have teachers on the team. Sort of in a parallel space, not exactly the same space, I think we have been very deliberate in recognizing where there is mutual interest. And we talk about the levels of capacity and the role of school leader, the role of teacher. when you think about leadership as a key variable in making this work, not only do we need to intentionally invest in ensuring that we have a continuous pipeline of strong leaders, but we also need to look at teacher leadership. They are our future leaders of schools. And as both Mary and Beatrice have said, how you offer leadership opportunities and construct those opportunities is ultimately critical to success. This year, we've been able to identify huge opportunities to work in conjunction with the union. Part of our intervention strategy in our lower performing schools has been with the union. So we've gone into Mildred Ave, and we have made significant changes in that school through an intervention model that is part of the union contract. We've now gone into Madison Park. That one's a heavy lift, but we've done so in conjunction with the union. So I like the conversation about, is it pilot schools, is it charter schools, is it Horace Mann charters, or turnaround, or traditional. The conversation has to become very different. It's not us about them, it's about we. How do we engage in this together? How do we define a future vision that is solely driven by student interest? Not my interest, not Linda's interest, not anybody's interest here. Student interest.
Thank you, John. We'll go right down, I think, to Beatrice, and we'll do closing thoughts, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions and conversation. Where are we? What do you see coming next? Anything you didn't get to say that you wish you did? Now's your chance. Beatrice?
Uh-oh. Okay, let me adjust my mic. Well, I think this is not a new conversation. I mean, this conversation started 20 years ago. It actually got the push in 1993 with education reform and the creation of charter schools, which was seen as a great threat to public education. But actually, it has fulfilled one of the goals, which is to really foster creativity in the Boston Public Schools. It's no secret that it was an agreement between the union and the school district that created pilot schools. It was the second person in command in the union at the time who was the architect of pilot schools. And so that it's been a conversation. It's not, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Right now we have 20 years of experience, capacity, the leadership of all these pilot schools, and now in-district charter schools and innovation schools. There's a very rich potential for building capacity in the rest of the district. In terms of Central, how Central needs to reorganize, it's really about what John said, it's the we. We need to stop the management versus teachers. We need to stop Central versus schools or principals. And it's really embracing what we started 20 years ago, affirming it, and really making it, this is the catalyst for the next level in Boston. Boston is not in a crisis mode, despite what some of these reports have alluded to. We're in a great position to take it to the next level and really set the table, as Linda told us when she was forming the cross-functional team. We're setting the table for the next superintendent in Boston. And I think that there's a lot of interest. It is a game changer, and there's a lot of interest, not just in schools, but citywide. How do we do this and do it right, and not be afraid of taking some risks that may result in some mistakes that then we can correct because we're shifting our culture, the way we operate within ourselves. So I'm really proud to be part of the Boston Public Schools and to have this opportunity, you know, to really look what's next in Boston. But here we are. We're next.
Thank you. John, do you want to add anything about where we're going? What's next?
Well, first of all, after today, tomorrow night is school committee. So we will be sharing this with school committee. School committee has recently gone through a recent process of establishing high-level goals and priorities for the district. And I think part of the conversation has to be, where does this fit within that context? So that's number one. I think I appreciate Mary's comments. We haven't waited. We've moved forward. I think the investments that we are currently making in significantly changing how we think about human capital in our district, it is a game changer. 100% of our principals and headmasters working with their boards and/or school site councils now control who comes into their school. They make the decision. Now, it's not without consequence. There are other values attached to the workforce. Our definition of a high-quality workforce is one that is also reflective, more reflective of the students that we serve. So schools need to demonstrate that they are intentional and mindful of that value. Schools also need to know that with the flexibility to hire, you've got to proceed to hire. Take advantage of that highly talented pool of candidates that's out there now. We've already met our goal for changing the dynamic for hiring. Close to 75% of our new hires next year have already been hired. And I think finally I would just say the whole notion, you talked about the cross-functional team and the power of that and the experience that you've had with it. That is a model for how we should be operating.
Thank you. Anne, last comment?
So the word, I didn't look it up, but autonomy to me sounds like you can go do your own thing. But when I think about autonomy, I actually think, oh, that makes you less isolated. Like it makes you more it creates the opportunity for you to be part of something bigger instead of being sort of trapped in your spot doing your thing inside your walls. I mean, I think about the first year principals, and that number is staggering. But then I think, well, we have a first year principal at our school. But we also have a board that has a strong and long history with our school, and we're supporting her, and we're evaluating her. And when she says, I need a community partner because we don't have a gym, you know, we say, oh, well, somebody on the board knows the YMCA, which is across the street, and now kids swim. Like, it can be done because we have autonomy to decide that's how we're going to handle PE, we're going to swim at the Y. And we have a whole group of people who are supporting this new young principal in creating a school that works. So being autonomous doesn't mean go, rogue and do whatever you want. And the other side of it is that the teacher voice in an autonomous school is a very valued part of the process. And I'm glad that you went there and you said teachers union in this space, because I think it's important that we think. For me, I spend more time thinking about the teachers and not so much about, the quotes in the globe. I'm worried about the teachers in the building, where I am, and what they bring when they come to a board meeting and what they say they need. And I think the more schools move to autonomous models, the more teachers are able to come and make decisions in their buildings and have power and be professional in their practice. And so I hope that teachers on the ground will see that, will be able to talk to their colleagues, and will be able to embrace this as a real opportunity for them and for the broader community to work together to make schools meet their full potential for our kids.
Thank you. Andres?
I just want to say that I never associated the word rogue with Ann Walsh at all.
Straight and narrow, that's me.
I agree, endorse what everybody's saying. I think that taking the conversation beyond compliance, I mean, so much of the conversations in schools are about what we have to do, creates enormous opportunity around values, around behaviors. I think that this opens up possibilities at every level of the system and engaging all stakeholders. And I think that's a good thing, since schools are inherently incredibly complex. And this is respectful of their complexity, I think.
Thank you. And Mary, last word.
Well, I think in terms of next steps, we have this document, which is a great starting point. And although the union wasn't a part of the conversation, certainly I think the document captures the conversation, and it's certainly something that I'm going to take back to teachers at my school, and I think teachers reading this will understand sort of both what's at stake and what the opportunities are. And so I wouldn't pretend to say, like, this is what I think should be the next thing. What I think what needs to be the next thing is that the kind of really rich conversation with all stakeholders as part of it needs to be the next thing, so that whatever the next step is, everybody owns it, everybody is accountable to it, and everybody will reap the benefits.
Thank you. Well, please join me in thanking this really interesting, wonderful panel. Thank you. I think we could probably go on for another 2 hours, but we want to make sure to open the floor to hear from you. Questions that you have for the panel. We don't have a lot of time, so if you could just say who you are and then ask a question and try to refrain from statements. Sherry?
Hi, I'm Sherry Andes. I am the former executive director of 15 years of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, and currently in transition. My question is probably Michelle or David or Linda maybe can answer it, or maybe one of the panelists. It goes to something that Anne was alluding to, which is the role of parents in autonomous schools, and what were they able to observe whether parents are more engaged in autonomous schools? I don't know whether you looked at that, whether there was any anecdotal evidence for that, whether that'd be something to look at in the future.
So Anne, is this on? Anne sort of alluded to the constraints of the report. We were not able to include parent interviews, family interviews, or student interviews. And so many of us on the research team feel that that is the next step. However, you, I think, heard Anne's comments about family involvement. Certainly, as a longtime leader of autonomous schools, I can attest to the fact that families are very, very involved. But I do think that that is a piece of work that needs to come next.
Mm-hmm. Yes, in the back. Oh.
Thank you. My name is Megan Wolf, and I'm from a parent group called Quest. So first, just to contextualize a little, I have two students in the Boston Public Schools, both of whom have been at traditional schools that act like autonomous schools. One because the principal just did whatever she wanted, and that was successful. So the other because of money. So I'm curious about the way that some autonomous schools in Boston succeed, and wondering what ways that you looked at some of the things that come along with autonomy in Boston, such as more financial support. I think that that's been gone along with a lot of them. Also, the changing of special ed populations in the school, removing special ed classrooms, and also putting in very experienced principals. I think that,
so
wondering
Megan,
how that
is
affects.
the question, what are the contributors to the success of autonomous schools?
No, I'm sorry. More, how did you look at those factors when measuring the success of autonomous schools?
Thanks. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. So in the report, you'll find details on the student makeup in different types of schools, and with a few exceptions, largely around English language learners, there's not, at least across the subset of types of schools, huge variances in population. So there's going to be individual schools, I'm sure, that are all over, but generally speaking, we could not say, oh, well, you know, certain type of schools are attracting different types of students. That's not been the case. In terms of funding, we didn't go in and do the level of detailed analysis at ADRS we would typically do to measure equity of funding. But from what we know from the implementation of weighted student funding and the observations we've been able to make since, we would say that the district has achieved a pretty reasonable measure of equity. And I want to be clear about that equity doesn't mean the same amount of dollars. It means equity based on the specific needs of the students in the school. I do think that we certainly have anecdotal information that says some schools are able to tap into an engaged family population or a higher income population to be able to raise money to supplement that, which is sort of a separate issue. But generally speaking, as the headline, the types of sort of like standard assumptions about inequity biasing towards autonomous schools, we did not find that to be true systematically.
Elizabeth, can I just do a follow-up on that?
Sure.
Would you mind? So my experience as a board chair at a pilot school is that we actually have chosen to move to a full inclusion model, which means that we're including more students with disabilities and IEPs in our classrooms. Also, when I think about when, you know, in my work, when families come to me, especially with special education concerns, and they say, you know, what are the best places I can find for special education services for my children, I think about the Haley Pilot School. I think about the Mary Lyon Pilot School. I think about the Mason Pilot School. And I think about the Henderson School, which is actually choosing to become an innovation school. So I think that schools that are really taking on the value of including all our students, including, you know, students with disabilities, and making it a core part of their identity are often autonomous schools. And I think Mary Driscoll is telling me that having autonomy would help her better serve the students with disabilities in her school as well. So I think that autonomy can work really well in serving students and families who are working with the special education programming.
Yeah, and Andres, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so this is not about the autonomous schools and more about the workings of autonomy in a system, which is that part of what a thoughtful conversation about the boundaries of autonomy should engender is real honesty about how systems sometimes engineer failure and engineer success for individual schools. And in Baltimore, part of what was a very upfront conversation at the start, which engaged everyone, including the district authorized charters, and we grew the number of charters from 17 to 35 during my tenure, so we were really pushing for something, while at the same time keeping at the front of the conversation what were the rules that we were going to live by. There was a really serious conversation about the distribution of students, about programs, about choices that were being made at schools that were sometimes pushing students into other schools. That was a very explicit conversation, and it was part of that conversation about the rules of the game that we were going to come back to. And what I expect will happen here, and I say that again, with enormous modesty and all kinds of caveats, since I don't know the schools like you do, is that in the context of implementation, you might need to change some of the rules about the autonomies that already exists for some schools if you're going to get to a place which is about greater equity and excellence for all schools. I don't know what that means, so I can be very bold in stating it. And I'm not, of course, accountable like John is. That's one of the great gifts of no longer being a superintendent. But you know, we struggle, and we had an extraordinarily responsible charter sector that was willing to come to the table and say, look, you know, we know what the word is out there about how we're succeeding because we're not teaching the same kids, and we want to end that. And we ended up with an enormous amount of collaboration around the placement of programs, around everybody holding up the burden in ways that serve the entire district. How that happens in a different place with different set of rules and different set of schools, well, that's the fun of the work.
Thank you. I think we have time for probably one more question. Yes, Herb?
Thank you. I'm Herb Morris, one of the directors of the foundation. My question is actually directed to any members of the school committee who are here. And that is, what do you expect the impact of this powerful report will be on the search that we're undertaking for John's successor?
Mike or Hardin, do you want to?
Hopefully none, right?
I should have ducked out first. Well, I think a lot of this goes back to what, and thank you for putting me on the spot, sir. I think a lot of this goes back to the conditions, you know, and I love that term. It's been used so much today, that John's put in place here over the last year. We talk about the weighted student funding, and of course that goes back over a number of years, and now the hiring process. This is, these are different flavors, as we've heard, of the different types of autonomies that can help create those conditions for success. And so, you know, I view a lot of the work that John's doing, and I think you know, I won't speak for my colleagues, but I would venture that a lot of them would feel the same way, is certainly setting us up for finding someone who can continue on that path and continue to refine it in the vein that we've heard a lot of the comments here today in terms of trying to figure out what it is that works best in the current system and what it is that we can learn from our colleagues in the charter industry, as well as in the different flavors of the autonomies in the system today. And so I'm hopeful that, you know, we'll have a fertile crop that are interested in that type of innovation. But we'll have to wait for more to come on that, of course.
Thank you. Hardin, do you want to add anything? No? Okay, well, we do actually have time for one more question, if there is one in the room. Yeah. Oh, I can't see, but apparently there is one over here. No? Oh, yeah. John. Oh, John.
John Mudd. I describe myself as an advocate emeritus in the system. You know, I think it's an extraordinarily rich discussion, and I think very, very important, you know, in establishing a base for further movement. I have two kinds of questions. You know, one, having had experience in managing decentralized systems, I sort of phrase an issue as what is the central role in a decentralized system? And I think Professor Alonso said with every grant of authority comes a responsibility for providing support, you know, to make that authority used well. And so I guess I'm intrigued with what next steps, you know, you consider taking in terms of sort of treating that change of central mindset, you know, in the central office. Second question, if I could, is there are broad system issues like the plateauing of students in literacy in 3rd and 4th grade, which cut across a system. You know, how do we address those kinds of questions of that, or questions of the achievement gap or diversity in hiring in a system of autonomous schools? So sorry to throw so much at the end.
Linda or John, do you want to?
John, as always, your questions are great. But I think one of the things that the study does point out and the report does point out is some of the strides we've already made. And one of the most exciting is actually in our Office of Human Capital and the way we're thinking about professional development for teachers. So I'm actually really encouraged that if we can think about at the leadership level how to help, we've just begun our network structure, and I think that the study shows that it's just begun, and there's a lot of room for improvement and a lot of desire in the system for principals and teachers to work more in affinity groups. So we have a lot of dual language schools, for example. We haven't yet figured out how to get those teachers and those principals to work together over time, but we're going to get there. So I'm very hopeful about, as a lot of the panelists have said, is if we take this study seriously, I think it really could be a roadmap for a lot of the work we do. So thanks for those questions.
John, do you want to add anything?
So I think number one is you establish clear expectations. I think we've already begun to do that. Secondly, you support people to succeed in a newly defined space. So there is a matter of, we have some very strong and collaborative leaders in the district. How do you expand that? How do you share those best practices? How do you build on strength rather than focus on weakness? And how do you continue to support those people who have, by the way, had various definitions of their work historically built for them? So it's not just about individuals. There's been what Andre's alluded to before. What do the systems and structures that are in place, what are those signals that are sent to people who are really employed to support schools? But what are those contrary signals that we send? Keep on being mindful of those. Identify where barriers are. Tear down the barriers. So I think part of our next work is just to, number one, both model that, and number two, to be very intentional about it as we engage with broader audiences, engage with the school committee, and see where this leads us. I don't think everything is defined yet. There's a lot yet to be done.
So to be continued, please join me in thanking our panel once again.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This has been a discussion of extraordinary quality and depth, and I think it reflects what we started with, which is a report of extraordinary quality and depth. I want to thank Linda, David, and Michelle, and everybody who worked on this. It is really a seminal document. I want to thank, of course, our panel, and particularly Interim Superintendent McDonough for his presence and willing to take any questions that come, and indeed for asking for this report in the first place, as has been noted. There were a couple of questions in the course of the discussion about whether this might be a game changer or a historic turning point in the Boston Public Schools. And it caused me to think about what the choices really are here. And I would argue that despite the many complexities that are going to have to be dealt with, the fundamental choice isn't that difficult. I mean, is it conceivable that we could go back to a traditional format citywide? Is that possible? There are too many Beatrices, too many people who have tasted the appeals of an autonomous structure. A third of the students, as we heard, are going to be going to them. I don't think that's politically feasible, among other things. Well, could we stay where we are? Well, that reminds me of the line from the old song, "Stuck in the Middle with You." We heard all sorts of testimony that, as exciting as the proliferation of these new models has been and the experience and insight it's generated, it's pretty chaotic with all these categories of schools operating. And we heard that the other districts that have embraced autonomies have been very, very clear about what the rules are, and whatever other problems they have, at least they have a citywide consistency. So stuck in the middle is not where we can stay. It's absolutely not feasible. So it seems to me what we're really talking about is going forward. And we heard particularly from Mary, that it is more than possible to generate first-rate results in a traditional school. But we also heard it requires a person of extraordinary creativity and ingenuity to kind of overcome the format, to go do the things they would do more naturally and easily and be encouraged to do in an autonomous format. So I actually don't think we have much choice but to go forward. This is the future. Embrace it. Deal with the many complexities that we have. And one thing I might note that the report said in reference to the superintendent search, the report is very emphatic that the choice of the superintendent is critical to the continued progress of this process. And again, it's kind of unthinkable to appoint a superintendent wedded to a traditional format, unfamiliar with the kind of ferment of experimentation and changes that have gone on. As always, the ability of the Foundation to present this forum and fund the research is made possible by the Civic Leadership Fund, our annual fund that supports our civic leadership activities. There are many contributors to the fund here today. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you for being here, I think, during one of the most fascinating discussions about the future of education I've ever been a part of. Have a great day, everybody.